Somewhere in the 1st century, in a small room in Rome, a man twisted another man's leg until it broke. The man whose leg was breaking did not scream, he did not beg. He simply looked up and said, calmly, "You will break it." And when it broke, he added, without a flicker of anger, "Did I not tell you that you would?" The man whose leg was broken was a slave. He owned nothing, not his body, not his time, not even the right to decide where he slept that night. And yet, decades later, the most powerful man on earth, the Emperor of Rome, would keep that slave's teachings by his bedside and reread them until the pages wore thin. How does a man with no possessions, no freedom, and no power end up training emperors on how to think? This is not a motivational exaggeration. This is the actual, documented life of a man named Epictetus. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how he did something that should have been impossible. He became one of the freest minds in human history, while wearing chains. If you have ever felt trapped by your circumstances, a job you can't leave, a situation you can't control, a past you didn't choose, this story was built for you. Let's begin. Part 1. Born into nothing. Epictetus was born around 50 AD in a town called Hierapolis, in what is now modern-day Turkey. We don't even know his real birth name. Epictetus isn't a name at all. It's a Greek word that simply means acquired one, a label given to property. He was born a slave, and from birth, his identity in the eyes of Roman society was not a person. He was an object that belonged to someone else. As a young boy, he was taken to Rome and sold into the household of a man named Epictetus, a former slave himself who had risen to become a powerful secretary to Emperor Nero. This is worth sitting with for a moment. Epictetus's owner was a man who had once been enslaved too, and who now, having gained power, participated in exactly the same system that had once held him down. Life in that household was brutal. Historical accounts, including the story you just heard about his leg, describe Epictetus enduring physical abuse as a matter of routine. He had no legal rights. He could be beaten, sold, or worse, entirely at his owner's discretion. There was no court he could appeal to, no authority he could turn to for protection. In the eyes of Roman law, he simply did not count as a full human being maxed. Most people, under those conditions, would be consumed by rage, despair, or a kind of numb resignation. And that's exactly what makes what happened next so extraordinary. Part 2. The philosophy that couldn't be chained. Despite his status, Epictetus's owner allowed him to study philosophy, likely because an educated slave was considered more valuable, a useful asset for the household, rather than an act of kindness. Epictetus was sent to study under a Stoic teacher named Musonius Rufus, one of the most respected philosophers of the time. And here is where the story turns. In those lessons, Epictetus encountered an idea that would define the rest of his life, and eventually reshape the way millions of people across 2,000 years would think about freedom itself. The idea was this: there are only two categories of things in existence. Things that are up to us, our judgments, our choices, our reactions, our will, and things that are not up to us, our bodies, our possessions, our reputation, other people's opinions, and yes, even our literal freedom. Think about how radical this idea must have sounded coming from a man in chains. Here was a slave, someone who, by every external measure, had nothing up to him, arguing that the only thing that actually mattered was never taken from him in the first place. His body could be broken, his labor could be stolen, his location could be dictated by someone else's whims. But his mind, his judgments, his interpretations, his internal responses to what happened to him remained entirely, completely his own. No owner, no whip, no chain could reach into that space and control it. This wasn't a comforting fantasy. This was, for Epictetus, a survival mechanism that became a complete philosophy of life. Part 3. Freedom, finally, and a new beginning. At some point, likely after Nero's death in 68 AD, Epictetus gained his freedom. We don't know the exact details, whether he was formally freed by his owner or gained his freedom through the chaos following Nero's fall, but by his 30s, Epictetus was a free man for the first time in his life. What did he do with that freedom? He didn't chase wealth. He didn't chase revenge against a system that had brutalized him for decades. He began to teach. He opened a school of philosophy, first in Rome and later in Nicopolis, in Greece, after Emperor Domitian banished all philosophers from Rome around 93 AD. A reminder that even after gaining personal freedom, Epictetus still lived under the constant threat of powerful men who could upend his life with a single decree. And yet, his response to that new instability was consistent with everything he had already learned. He adapted, he kept teaching, and he refused to let external chaos dictate his internal state. His school became remarkably popular, not just with ordinary citizens, but with the sons of senators, the wealthy, and the powerful, who traveled specifically to sit at the feet of a former slave and learn how to think. Let that sink in. The very class of people who, a generation earlier, might have owned men like him, were now paying to be taught by him. Part 4. The teachings that outlived him. Epictetus himself never wrote a single word down. Everything we know of his teachings comes from a student named Arrian, who transcribed his lectures into two major works, the Discourses and a short, powerful summary called the Enchiridion, which translates roughly to handbook or manual for living. The core of his teaching can be boiled down to a few devastatingly simple principles. First, it is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about events. Something happens, a loss, an insult, a setback, and that event itself is neutral. What creates suffering is the story we tell ourselves about it. Second, focus entirely on what is up to you and release your grip on everything else. This wasn't passive resignation. Epictetus wasn't telling people to stop caring about their lives or stop taking action. He was teaching them to stop wasting their emotional energy on outcomes they couldn't control, so they could pour that energy fully into what they could. Third, freedom is not the absence of external constraint. It is the mastery of your internal response to constraint. This is the single idea that makes Epictetus's philosophy so radical, because he lived it under conditions most of us will never face. He was quite literally a slave when he first began developing these ideas. If freedom required the absence of chains, he would have had no claim to it at all. Instead, he found freedom in a place no chain could reach. Part 5. The Emperor Who Carried His Words. Here is where the story reaches its most remarkable turn. More than a generation after Epictetus's death, he died sometime around 135 AD. A young man named Marcus Aurelius came into possession of the Discourses, most likely introduced to them by one of his own tutors. Marcus Aurelius would go on to become the Emperor of Rome, arguably the most powerful position that existed anywhere on earth at that time. And yet, in his private journal, the collection of personal reflections we now know as meditations, never intended for anyone else to read, Marcus Aurelius repeatedly references and draws directly from Epictetus's teachings. Consider the strange, almost impossible geometry of this. A man born into slavery, who spent decades of his life legally classified as property, ended up shaping the private inner world of the single most powerful human being on the planet. Epictetus never met Marcus Aurelius. He never lived to see his ideas reach an emperor. He simply taught, consistently, faithfully, to whoever showed up, and his words traveled further than his body ever had permission to. This is the quiet, staggering power of what Epictetus actually proved with his life, that the mind cannot be owned, even when the body is, that teaching, ideas, and internal discipline can outlast chains, outlast empires, and outlast the very people who tried to enforce those chains in the first place. Part 6. What this actually means for you. It would be easy to hear this story and file it away as historical trivia, an interesting fact about an ancient philosopher. But that would miss the entire point of why this story has survived for nearly 2,000 years. Epictetus is proof of a very specific, very practical claim. Your circumstances do not have final authority over your internal state. Not because your circumstances don't matter, they clearly do, and Epictetus never pretended otherwise, but because there remains, always, a space inside you that responds to those circumstances, and that space is yours to govern. You are not enslaved the way Epictetus was, but you may feel trapped in a job that drains you, a relationship that hurts you, a financial situation that limits your choices, a past that keeps replaying in your mind. And in moments like that, it's easy to believe that your peace, your discipline, your sense of self depend entirely on those external conditions changing first. Epictetus's entire life argues the opposite. He built an unshakable inner world while owning nothing, while having no legal protection, while enduring violence that most of us will never have to imagine. He didn't wait for his circumstances to improve before he started practicing freedom of mind. He practiced it in the middle of the worst conditions imaginable, and only later did his external circumstances change. This is the order almost everyone gets backwards. We tell ourselves, once things get better, I'll be calmer. Once I have more control, I'll be disciplined. Once life is easier, I'll be at peace. Epictetus's life says the opposite is true. The internal work comes first. The external freedom, if it comes at all, comes after. And even if it never comes, the internal freedom was never dependent on it in the first place. A man with a broken leg owned by another human being once looked up calmly and said, "Did I not tell you that you would?" That sentence is not resignation. It is not weakness. It is the sound of a man who had already located the one part of himself that no one, not his owner, not the empire, not violence itself, could ever take. Centuries later, an emperor would read his words every single night, searching for the same thing Epictetus had already found while in chains. You don't need chains to learn this lesson. You just need to ask yourself the same question Epictetus asked himself, over and over, in far harder conditions than most of us will ever face. What, right now, is actually up to me? Start there. That question, asked consistently, is the beginning of the same freedom a slave once taught an emperor. If this story moved you, subscribe to Mind and Method, because next week we go deeper into the exact daily exercises Epictetus taught his students, the same ones Marcus Aurelius used to govern an empire without losing himself in the process. Until then, remember what is yours and let the rest go.